Okay, good morning. Thank you for joining me. If you are joining me live for the Bookless classroom, it's Tuesday and we are on day 3 of our class and we are in week number 2. So, and I am here to, because there's a lot of complaints about what's going on in our educational system. And this is a great way that if you are, wherever you are, if you want to come to class with me, parents, you can trust that I will teach your kids what they're supposed to be learning instead of all the other nonsense that we see. So this is the Bookless classroom, and the idea of the Bookless classroom is I know in this age group, which is approximately middle school age, is what I'm aiming towards. But we don't want to necessarily wrap our ideas or our brains around age groups, because we could be at all different stages in our learning, right? And so that's what I'm here to help you. You want to come to a bookless classroom and you're 25, come to the bookless classroom. Who cares, right? This is a classroom where you really can come and be unprepared and learn a lot in this classroom. But if I were you, I would always bring a pen and a paper to class, because that really helps you learn. And it will also help you decide what you want to discuss with other people later on, right? Because that is how we end up. Let me restart recording. Because that is how we end up remembering things, is by, in our brain, our stomachs digest food, our brain digests information. And the way that we learn things is by going over the information and churning it up, just like our stomachs churn up the food that we eat and put in all kinds of chemicals. That's what our brain does too. Our brain churns up the information and in the meantime puts in a whole bunch of chemicals, neurotransmitters in our brain that helps us remember that information, file it away, get it later on when we need to get it later on, when we're talking or remembering or whatever we're doing. So get a piece of paper and a pen, but you don't need any books. It doesn't mean that I won't be using books. I will be using books, of course. That's where I get my information from, is from books. I'll be using books, and if you would like to get the books, you can get the books. They're always good books that I'm using, because I went to school, so I know what good books are, and I'm a teacher, so I know what good books are. Okay. And a couple of mints in my mouth. I don't know why those lights keep doing that. And now they're not even on. Hold on, give me a second. Lighting! Lighting! I need some lighting here. Okay, I'm on it. Well, that is weird. I don't know if the whole thing overheated or what. Or if it's my neighbors. It's likely my neighbors. We're not going to talk about my neighbors. No, I think it overheated is what it did. So I'm going to have to do this on the low, on the down low, as in the down low lights. And we'll get this thing cooled down a little bit. Sorry about that. In fact, I know what I'm going to do. I got to get a different plug. Let's keep going here. We're going to do, I'm going to be a little bit on low lights for a second, and then I'll get my lights back up and running, I'm sure. But this whole thing is overheating, and that's what the problem is. Oh, yeah. Technical difficulties. Where are my technicians? I'm on it. Okay. So what the very first thing I wanted to tell you was, what book are we using in the bookless classroom? Because even though we don't have books, we are still, I use books. As I just said, of course I use books. And so this book that I'm using for this lesson is going to be kind of a lengthy lesson. So if you took a look at what I've got up there, it says what we're going to do is we're going to do some Q&A to finish off the Who Moved My Cheese. So a little review on Who Moved My Cheese, and we're going to wrap that up. So we left you with some questions on Thursday on Who Moved My Cheese, and I'm going to go back to those questions, and we're going to review, just to do a little bit of review to, again, help us redigest that information. And then the book, and then as you can see, it says, now we're going into American history, exploring a new world. And we're going into American history. And the book that I am using to help convey some of this American history, just so that you know, and so that your parents know, the book that I'm using is this, it's by Todorov, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce the name, Vetin Todorov. There's my Russian, yay! And it's The Conquest of America. Now, remember that America was discovered and conquested from a lot of different ways, a lot of different areas. So we had, the Mayflower come in and settle in on Plymouth Rock, right? And we had Virginia, then the colonies that were built up. But we also had in 1492, we had Columbus sailing the ocean blue. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? So Columbus came in from the south then. So, and then we had things like the Louisiana Purchase. We had Lewis and Clark expedition, discovering the West. So we had lots of periods where we were discovering and settling America. This is the Conquest of America here. This is about Christopher Columbus. And so this is where I'm starting. This is what we know. Columbus discovered America. College, this is and I'm talking to middle school students, I really am. But remember that when we give you information as a teacher, when I give you information as a teacher, I get that. I don't get that information from fifth grade books, right? I get that information from the college books that I learned the information from. And then what I do is I teach it to you in age appropriate ways. The point here is this, is that I still need to know the right history, and I need to know it from an adult perspective, not from a fifth grade perspective. I need to know it as an adult in order to teach this to you. And so we've heard a lot of, probably you've heard a lot of arguing and a lot of problems about what we should be teaching and what we shouldn't be teaching. As an adult, I have to learn everything there is to learn, as much as I can, about what I'm teaching you. But then what I teach you isn't everything that I know. So you might be interested in the book that I'm using, but this is an adult book. And as we talk about American history in this very unique kind of way that I'm going to talk about it, the facts that I'm getting here, I am getting from this very adult book. But I'm going to be teaching these facts to you at an age appropriate level. Now, I'm telling you that again so that you, if you want to get the adult book, you can. It's because we have no age limits. Really, I talk age appropriately, but anyone can join this class. So anyone else might be interested in the adult book. Some people might be interested in the adult book that I'm using. But we're a little ways away from that. One of the reasons why I'm using this adult book is because it has, the way that it's presenting the facts is in a wonderful way. And I'm going to tell you right now how it's presenting the facts, and I'm going to mention that all the way throughout. So here, what we see here is lots of words because it's a pretty dense book. And let me tell you something, it's pretty amazing. It's a pretty amazing book. If you like US history on an adult level, this is an amazing book. But it's an amazing book because it's taking quotes here. So how do I know? We've got so many people who are saying, um, uh, you know, take this history book off. We don't want to teach this. We need to be teaching patriotism here in America. This is patriotism. Patriotism is knowing the history of your country. You are not a patriot of your own country if you ignore the real history of your country. You can't be a patriot because you don't intimately know your country. You can't intimately know your country unless you know its real history without all the pretty flowers and things. But I'm not going to, America is a wonderful country. And so we need to understand what made this country so great. And that doesn't mean that we were all saints, right? And angels in this country. We need to know what makes this country great. And that's not built on falsehoods about our country. We will only know what made our country great when we know exactly what we did to get here. Doesn't mean we don't have problems, but we live in a really great country. So we need to know the truth about what worked for this really great country. And so this book though is really blatantly and in your face honest. But what does it do? It's not there to be, we call salacious, to kind of get you, like everything is nowadays, to get you all worked up. They're not talking about history in a way just to get you all worked up about history. It's a real truthful look at our history. But what they're doing is they are giving you an honest perspective about our history. And how can they use quotes? What are they quoting? Who was talking to them that they have quotes? You know what their quotes came from? Of course, from books that were written of the time, what was going on politically, because we have information about that historically, documents about what policies were being made, right? But also going back to the actual journal notes, because Christopher Columbus was an explorer. So he was a scientist. He was an explorer. He was discovering. So he was a scientist. And all good scientists take good notes. So where are they getting this information from? From history books written at the time, from policies that were written at the time, from letters that they saved. Of course, they would have saved letters from Christopher Columbus to the Queen of Spain. Of course, they would have saved those letters. They were documents that are historical documents. And so when people are saying that they want to eliminate history from our books, they really are talking about documents that are invaluable, letters that were written to one another, and journals from Christopher Columbus himself. So that's why this book, although a very adult book, is a great book for me to teach from you, because the facts in here come right here. It says journal, Christopher Columbus's journal, 12/11/1492, folks. December 11th, 1492, right from Christopher Columbus's journal. Be very careful about anyone who wants to change history to make us look better, because let me tell you something, we can't look any better. We can't look any better than the truth. We can't look any better than the truth. And this looks magnificent. The truth in my mind of what Christopher Columbus did and what happened in 1492 is worth knowing the truth about, because it is magnificent. It literally gives me goosebumps when I think about it. It literally gives me goosebumps when I think about it. So don't let anybody rip the truth of our history from you, because their watered down, milky version of the way that we made this country great is boring. Their milked down, milky, watered down version that they want to give you instead of the truth will put you to sleep. And this will put goosebumps on your skin. I promise you. And I am not even a history buff. So that's where that's actually where we're starting. And that's where we're going. But we're not going to talk about this book now, probably for a little while. All right. Again, it's a very adult book, but again, with Christopher Columbus's own notes. I was just looking at another note over here to see if I could find another interesting one. I mean, this is just, it's an amazing piece of work. 1510, 1492. What's 1510? Not as in the year 1510, because the year is 1492. What month is 1510? Because over here they've got 12/11/1492, December 11th. What's 1510 1492? What? They're going to water down history for you, and this is just will make your hairs stand on, and it's so interesting. Okay, so let me get my light fixed over here. And then we're going to come back and do just a very short review of Who Moved My Cheese. Okay, lights back on. Problem solved for the moment. We will see. That was the first time that happened, but it's okay. Let me see. Let me get that light a little bit better there. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and we're going to get started with what we're going to talk about is how we're going to approach information for this lesson. All right. Before we get into necessarily American history. There was my earlier class. They were learning their alphabet and their vowels and some worksheets, so they had fun. Okay, all right, so let's go back to our Who Moved My Cheese. So we're just going to wrap it up with some questions and get your brains rolling a little bit again, because that was an important story. It was an important story for how we approach information, and even in particular, what we're talking about individuals who are trying to remove truthful history from our history, right? So, what does that do? What does that do for our journeys? What does that do for our knowledge, right? What does that do for our ability to be able to cope with future circumstances? If people are lying to you about history, well, then how can we learn from history? If hem and haw told you, and we fought our way and through the maze, we knocked down walls to find our cheese, and when we saw Sniff and Scurry in the new cheese station N, well, we walloped off their heads. Why wouldn't we? What would Hem and Haw have learned? What would I learn if that's the story that Hem and Haw decided to tell me now, right? What would I learn from their journey if that was the story that Hem and Haw decided to tell me later on, right? Hem is all emaciated over there, and he's telling me about how he was knocking down walls, and I'm looking around going, that doesn't make any sense to me, right? Sorry about that, but I'm changing the lighting. There we go. So that didn't make any sense to me. And what good does it do anybody when you change the real story? Nobody can benefit from the human experience if I change the story. Nobody can benefit from the human experience of Christopher Columbus. And there are some amazing things to think about in his journey. So we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm just really excited about it because I've never taught history and I've never been excited about history. There's the word search if you want to do the word search for the Who Moved My Cheese. I'm still trying to get those documents up for you in a decent place. But things are rolling and I'm rolling and we're on day 3 already. Okay, so it says here in Johnson's book, the cheese is a metaphor. What does the cheese really mean? And so I asked you that question, and the cheese really is our goals. Cheese, it is our goals. So we were looking to hang out. Hem and Haw were looking to hang out. They were looking to get up later. They were looking to be a little lazier around and have their friends and enjoy their cheese station C, right? That's what they wanted to do. So the cheese represents our goals. We're chasing after our goals. What do we do once we've reached our goals, right? And isn't it sometimes very healthy to be in pursuit of our goals, right? To be looking for our goals. Isn't that sometimes very healthy? Yes, it is, Dr. Feravich. It is very healthy. What does the maze represent? What does the maze represent? We talked about these again. We asked these questions on Thursday, and now I want to make sure that we're regenerating some thoughts and making sure that you have the important answers to these. So what does the maze represent? The maze represents our journey, how we get to our goals. And by the way, in our journey, our paths to our goals are never direct. They are never direct. We never go from point A to point B directly. There has to be all kinds of roads we travel down. Think about it. I just don't go decide to get my PhD and then turn around and print out a piece of paper, right? No. There are many roads, and those roads have roadblocks. They had roadblocks for me, right? It took a lot longer for me to get my PhD. So every goal that we have, every piece of cheese that we identify as our goal, it's never a straight shot. I just don't go, I want my PhD, and now I have my PhD. Of course not, right? Or bachelor's or masters or trade. You know, you may not realize this, but it takes, and these are in some songs too. So you may wonder what they're talking about 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours is what it takes to become an expert at anything. And no matter what, you have to put in those hours. You can't just go, oh, I'm going to pay $1,000 and now I only have to put in 5,000 hours instead of 10,000. I'm going to pay $10,000 and I don't have to put in any time. That's not how it is. It takes time, approximately 10,000 hours to become an expert. I've been watching, I saw an interview the other day on CBS News of Jamie Lee Curtis, who is the star from Halloween. And it was very apparent to me that that reporter did not put in her 10,000 hours. And not only that, but she really, the way that it was edited was very self-serving. And so we have got a lot of sort of responsibility in a way to present information the way that it's supposed to be presented. And how are you going to put in your 10,000 hours? If you're putting in your 10,000 hours hoping that you are already there in fame and fortune, it's just not going to happen. Even if you think about, well, you could say, well, Dr. Feravich, what about these Instagram stars, right? What about those Instagram stars? If you don't put in your 10,000 hours, you're going to have a very far fall from as high as you've gone. And that just is because you, what have you built on? You have to build on knowledge, right? You have to build on real knowledge. You can't, there we go. You can't build on lies that you know something that you don't know. The truth outlives the lie. Thank you, Jordan Davis, for Bluebird Days. The truth always outlives the lie. It does. Okay. But if we destroy all of our books, then we are starting at ground zero, aren't we? To try and find out truth. If we destroy our books, if we destroy our history, we're starting at ground zero to find out anything. 10,000 hours, starting with minute 1, when we destroy all of our information that we have or change it into lies. So that's what you have to look forward to. So stop those people who are changing our history books into lies, because that's self-serving. Okay, the next question. We want the real truth about history. We don't need to be spoon-fed a bunch of lies. What are we? A bunch of candy canes? No, that would be hard. How about, what do you call that? Cotton candy. There we go. What are we? A bunch of cotton candy balls? I don't even know. No matter how old we are, we all have to have some cheese. Right now, what is the cheese in your life? In other words, what are your goals? So that's what that question was about. So even though we're not really answering that question because I can't answer what is your cheese in your life, what are we talking about? We're talking about what are your goals that you have. So I want you to think about that. And since you have a pen and paper, maybe you might want to start writing down some goals. The way that we get our goals is by defining our goals. And the more immediate our goals are, I want a piece of cake, right? The more immediate our goals are, the less satisfying they are going to be for the long term. So if we expect to set a goal and have that accomplished in a very short time, we know it's just human nature to not find that very rewarding. Okay? All right, so I don't know what your goals are, right? I don't know what your goals are, but getting your cheese is, your goal. So what's the goal in your life? What's your cheese in your life? Okay. Why do I have that looking like All right. Then what I asked you to do, here we go. Then what I asked you to do last Thursday is I asked you to answer the question, who am I? And I asked you to answer that question by starting with I am. I am. Okay? And I told you that you can to take about 2, if you want to take 3 minutes, answering that question, and then that's it. All right. Now, as a psychologist, this tells me a lot of information about you. All right. So if you took the 2 minutes, how many answers did you end up having? Did you end up having 5 answers in the 2 minutes? Did you find it easy to answer that question, I am? Did you find it easy to answer that question and you were just ripping them off? Or was it difficult for you? And you were just like, I am what? I am what? And then did you also like hesitate to put some things down? That tells me something, right? Were you like, I don't know if she really means this, so I don't know if I'm going to put it down. And maybe that's the reason why you took a long time to write it down. I want to put down that I am intelligent, but that sounds conceited, and I don't really know if that's what she means. And so did you hem and haw about it? Did you hem and haw about answering that question? Because this tells us a lot. So first of all, if it was hard for you to answer that question, if you weren't sure what I wanted, if you didn't have a lot of answers, let's say that you had less than 10, then what that tells me is that you don't have a strong self-concept. That's what that tells me. But that's okay. That's okay, because you know what? We're learning who we are. That's what this class is about. So when I say it tells me that you don't have a strong self-concept, what that tells me is that something that you want to work on. Now, this is kind of interesting because a self-concept can't be set in stone. You can't be something today that you are at 12 years old or whatever age you are, and then be that exact same thing when you're 35. That would be silly, wouldn't it? If I were a skateboarder and then I was still skateboarding and that's all that I was doing at 35, that would be silly. And believe me, I do know some adults who do that, right? So I am, that person might say, I am still a kid, right? And by the way, that person might know who they are. They really might know who they are. They might have had a list of 40 things about I am and a list of 40 things. So just because you're a skateboarder at 35 years old doesn't mean that you don't have a self-concept. You could know who you are very well. At younger ages, you of course wouldn't. You of course wouldn't know exactly who you are at younger ages because your self-concept is developing. But see how that can tell me something? It tells me, and trust me, there are people who are 35 who can't answer that question thoroughly either, right? So that tells me how much you know about your self-concept. And even tells me a little bit about your self-doubt, right? I'm not sure if I should say this. Does she mean I am a girl? Does she mean that? I am a boy? Does she mean that? What does she mean? Oh, we're not supposed to call ourselves girls and boys, so that must not be what she means? Right? That tells me about who you are. So let's take a look at that picture there. So what does your self-concept, what is it made up of, right? Well, your self-concept can be things like your physical features. So down here in the red, it says physical. So self-concept can be what I physically look like, right? I am a boy. I am a girl. I am an athlete. I'm a trainer, right? Now we're starting to get into something a little bit more complex, right? I am a skateboarder. I am a music fan. I am intelligent. I am responsible. Now we're getting into personality traits, aren't we? Okay, so this tells me a lot about who you are. If you listed a lot of personality traits, so I am fun, I am an extrovert, I have lots of friends, I am curious, okay? You answered a lot of those questions about your personality. Well, you know what that tells us? That tells us that you're probably likely from a Western culture. Because Western people here in the United States, we're considered a West culture. We think a lot about ourselves, and that's okay too. Remember, this isn't judgment. We're just describing behaviors. There's no judgment with describing behaviors. So here in the West, and when we say we think about ourselves, and that sounds like selfishness, what do? We internalize things, right? What does that mean? It means we try and think about where we're going, what are our goals. That whole story about Sniff and Scurry and Hem and Haw were all about their personalities, is what it was about, right? Where Hem was very afraid, Haw was afraid at first, but then he was more like an investigator. Sniff and Scurry used their instincts, right? So that is telling us more about their personalities, right? And when we talk about our personalities, that really is more of a Western thing. We get to know about who they are on the inside. Hem was afraid. Haw was curious. Sniff and Scurry were using their instincts. So that tells us about their personality, and that really gives us an insight into who they are. We like to know about personalities, and so that's not a bad thing. Of course, it's not a bad thing, but it's different than what we consider Eastern culture. Now, this isn't everybody in the West behaves this way and everybody in the East behaves the other way, right? No, of course not. We just learn about cultures in general because that helps us understand, right? So in Eastern cultures, what they have a tendency to do is say, I am the son of, and then their last name. I am the son of Dr. Feravich. Okay. And they also talk about their social roles. I am a teacher, not about their personality. I am. This tells me something about me, right? When I talk about my personality, I'm telling you something about me. But when I tell you that I'm a teacher, it's about me, but you also know about the social role of a teacher because you know about teachers, right? You know what teachers do. You know what a teacher is. Okay? So, what I'm saying is that as you develop and understand and investigate yourself more, you begin to have a bigger vocabulary for who you are. Vocabulary. 5 stops in that word. 5 stops in that word. Vocabulary. Okay? That's a pretty big word. 5 stops in that word. So what that does is how do you get to know yourself better? You get to know yourself better because you have more words to describe yourself, right? I am. Did you use emotions? I am sad. So something right now in the present, right? Or I am joyful. Did you use emotions to describe yourself? And then if you did you just say, I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm glad? Were the emotions that you described, were they more on a first grade level of emotions? Or were they on a 5th grade level of emotions, right? I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm frustrated. Were they more on a college level of emotions? I'm melancholy, I'm perplexed, right? What that does is it the greater our vocabulary is, the better we are able to answer that question, I am, the more we know about our self concept. And that's what our self concept is. We measure your self concept in psychology as a scientist. We measure your self concept by answering that question. If you were to come into a lab and I wanted to measure your self concept, that's the question I would ask. Who am I? Answer that question and see all the things it would tell me about you. Now, I have another picture over there to the right. And that picture demonstrates the relationship for Eastern and Western cultures. So the picture over there to the right that I have is a picture of relationships. So in the middle of each one of those groups of circles, one on the top and one on the bottom, you can see is the self. It says the self. And then on the outside of there, you have circles representing your mother, a friend, another friend, a coworker, a sibling, and your father. And notice also that those circles vary in size. What that suggests is that those relationships impact you in different ways. Using that as an example, those circles as an example, we can see that the mother has a bigger circle than the father. So in this group, for this person A, and it says this is an independent view of the self. In person A, we can see that the mother is more important, the self has a greater relationship with the mother than the person has with the father. Oh, and you can also see that one of the friends is closer, has greater relationship, a bigger circle than the other friend. It has more X's there, so that there's more in common between the friend in the red and the friend in the blue. Okay, but the friend in the blue is closer to the self. Isn't that interesting as well? So a friend that I may have less in common with, I could be closer to. I'm going to take a drink of water. But the circles, if you notice, are not in the top picture, are not overlapping with the self. So what that suggests is that, and you can see also that the X's in the self in the picture at the top, they are black X's, while the X's in the circles in the top figure, they are white. In the bottom figure, the X's are white in the self, and they are white in the outer circles, which are now overlapping with the self. And it says that is an interdependent view of the self. So what we do is when we answer that question, who am I? We begin to also see whether or not your concept of yourself overlaps with other people's concepts. So when you compare yourself to your mother, are there lots of similarities so that your personalities overlap considerably? Or do you consider yourself very different than your mother? Same thing with your dad. Do you think that you share lots of personality traits with your dad? So, for example, do you both like to go fishing? Do you both like to work on puzzles? Do you both like to wear cargo shorts in the winter time? Okay, those are things about both of your personalities that are the same and they overlap. Here in Western culture, we don't see our personalities as overlapping as much with other people. We see ourselves as being unique and independent. So that's how we tend to answer that question, as being different than other people, as contrasting I'm not like that person. I'm like this. I'm my own person. Okay? So, some things to think about when you're thinking about who you are. Are you like other people? Why are you like those other people? Do you like them? Of course, you probably like them if you are like them, right? Similar to your mom, similar to your friend, we probably like them. So these help us develop who we are. And remember, that's part of this lesson. We're trying to figure out, who am I? And the more words we have to describe ourselves truthfully, the better we know who we are. Okay? All right, so that's what that question was for. And remember, we put that question in the middle of those sniff and scurry questions to help you begin to think. Are you like sniff, scurry, hem, or haw? Who are you like? And sniff and scurry were basically the same, one and the same, right? So sniff and scurry, or like hem or haw. Okay. And so that was the question there. We already talked about that. And what do you think about your approach to life? What do you think about how you run, or how you typo, how you deal with life, changes in your life and your relationships? Sorry, I'm reading that. Doesn't sound very good. What would you change? So this is, again, a question about your journey. How do you take your journey? And that tells you something about who you are as well. Are you more like him? So you're afraid to make a move and afraid to make a mistake? So you stay where you are? Are you like Haw, who you're afraid at first, but then you really do go out and accomplish your goals, right? So you will know more about yourself when you figure out how you go through your maze of life. Okay, now, I asked you to think about exploring a new world. That's what I asked you on Thursday to do. Think about exploring a new world. And I told you that it could mean anything to you. It didn't matter what it meant to you. To me, it didn't matter. Whatever it meant to you, exploring a new world, that's what I wanted you to think about. Okay? Now, you can still think about that, and your thinking will likely change as we talk about this a little bit more. So when I thought about having that as an assignment for you, as at least a mental exercise for you to think about, I was reading my Christopher Columbus book, right? So I was reading The Conquest of America. So when I was thinking about having you explore a new world, I was thinking about it from the point of Christopher Columbus, all right? But I didn't tell you that because I wanted you to think about, maybe you wanted to think about finding a new planet, right? Maybe you want to think about finding a new planet, and what would you do if you found a new planet? Or maybe you made up a virtual world and you wanted to explore your virtual world, right? There was, I think it was called Life Space or something like that, that was out there, that was a complete virtual world that people could go in there and watch presentations and all kinds of things, right? So maybe what you did is you decided to create your own virtual world and explore your own virtual world, okay? And if you haven't done any of this already, it doesn't matter. You can go back and you can think about it. And I'm not giving you any answers that you can't think about yourself, or that certainly giving you answers will probably change your thinking some, but it doesn't mean that you can't think about this, right? You can certainly think about it in your own way. Now that I've given you a little bit more information, it's going to change your thinking about this a little bit. Now, let me tell you about Christopher Columbus in exploring the New World, okay? So because this is a little bit of history as well that I said that I was going to give you. Are we doing this history yet? Hold on just a minute. Not yet. Okay. I want you to think about your perspective of exploring this new world. How did you approach it? Were you exploring a world that was empty and brand new, like the moon or like Mars, right? But still empty? Were you exploring a new world like you were an explorer like Christopher Columbus? So coming onto new land, but meeting people that you've never seen before. Maybe you were exploring a planet, right? That had aliens on it. So maybe that's the way that you took that. So now you were similar to Christopher Columbus. You were discovering a new world, right, with people on it. What did you do? What did you do on that planet, for example? Okay. Did you explore a world that you made? So you were the creator of that world. And then what did you do then? And even if you didn't do it, as I'm saying these options to you, which one sounds the most interesting to you? Does it sound more interesting for you to explore a land, a new land like Christopher Columbus? Did it sound more interesting to you to explore a new planet that has aliens? You know, we could explore a new world or a new land by going to Egypt as well, right? If we've never been there. So maybe you explored a world that exists and that you can really know about, right? And that you didn't have to make up. So maybe that's the world that you decided to explore, right? Okay. Now I'm gonna I actually want to just take just a 2-minute break, and I want to take a 2-minute break just because I want to get some socks on is what I want to do because my feet are cold. And so I'm going to take a 2-minute break, but in this 2-minute break, what I want you to do is I want you to think about what you would do when you were exploring a new world. What would you do? So think about some of the things that I was just saying, and this will give you maybe 2 minutes to jot some ideas down about your new world, and then, you know, engage in this little assignment, this little exercise or activity. I'll be right back. Okay, I am back. Putting on my other sock right now. Okay, so hopefully you took a little bit of time to think about your ideas about how you might want to then, in your own mind, explore a new world. Now, what I am going to do is I'm going to talk to you about how we approach a new world in a way as a scientist. So, if I were a scientist and I discovered a new world, what would I want to do as a scientist? Okay, we're going to start there. And then we're going to go into the Christopher Columbus's history of discovering our world. That's how we're going to do it. But again, this part of this is we want to be able to learn how to gather information like a real scientist, not like these fake scientists that we've had more recently, but how to really gather information, because that is how we get real knowledge. We don't need our heads filled up with a lot of fake knowledge about a lot of false facts, right? What would happen if I, said to you, the winner of the Super Bowl was the Cincinnati Bengals. Are they still called? Yeah, of course. I don't know. Does Cincinnati still have the Bengals? I don't even know. Who even knows? I just know it used to be the worst football team out there. And let's say, so that's who won the Super Bowl. All right. Well, who needs that information? Nobody needs your information when the information is false information. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. Nobody wants to write it down. And nobody wants to listen to you when you have false information. And so, even though we've had lots of arguments about what is truthful and what isn't, it doesn't really serve anybody if our information that we have is false. It's not knowledge, right? What it is it's ignorance. It's not knowledge, it's ignorance. So what we want to do is we want to look at, let's start by looking at the difference between what's called producers and consumers. And this information I teach in my research design class. And this is from Beth Morling's book on research design. So giving Beth Morling credit for her great book on research designs. Okay, so producers and consumers. Are you a consumer or are you also a producer? That should be of research, not or research. Of research. It's doing us a little late last night. So it says, are you a producer? Are you a consumer of research? Or are you also a producer of research? We are all consumers of research. All of us are consumers. Whenever you go and you research buying a new phone, you are a consumer of research. If you go to buy a new television, you're a consumer of research. If you find out what made somebody famous on Instagram, you are a consumer of research, okay? When you are looking up lyrics to a song, you are a consumer of research. You're researching a song to find out the lyrics. So you are a consumer of research. We are all consumers of research. Every minute of every day, we are making decisions, and we are making decisions based on past knowledge, new information. So we're consuming. We are consumers of information. We are consumers of research, okay? But are you a producer of research? Who produces research? Well, obviously, people who do polls, right, produce research. Obviously, scientists produce, let's start right there. Obviously, scientists produce research, right? That's what they're supposed to be studying. Doctors produce research in medicine, right? So that's a producer of research. But there are all kinds of producers of research. Somebody who is a marketing analysis, right? So who is saying what will make my product sell? Those are producers of research. All the algorithms that people are collecting, they are collecting research. That's a producer of research. Somebody who writes a book, this Todorov is a producer of research, right? So there are a lot of people who are producers of research, putting these YouTube videos together for people who are doing arts and crafts. That's a producer of information, right? So many of us are producers as well. And in fact, almost all of us are producers of information as well as consumers. Sometime or another, we are producing information. If I have a conversation with somebody about climate change, I am a producer of information, right? I may not have looked up the information, but I'm producing it from some other source, which is what we all do anyway, right? Even Todorov, who put this book together, is producing information from other sources. All right, so all of us are consumers of information. Almost all of us are producers of information as well. If we're teaching anything, we're a producer of information, right? Okay. So we want to make sure that we have accurate information. We cannot just be, shooting our mouths off about something that we really know nothing about. That creates a lot of chaos, as we have seen, because the medical industry has been shooting their mouth off about certain things that may or may not be based in fact. And we know that, right? We know that. We need to make sure that people who are producers are honest producers, because information is so important. I think this is just me, but I happen to think that books are sacred. And what sacred means is that they are holy, that we need to teach them, at least in some way, and that we need to treat them with reverence. And that is because they are filled with so much information. And I was reading that writers have actually a moral responsibility to get the facts right, because it would be immoral to speak a voice, to write something, to have a voice, and have it all be lies, have it be misinformation. That really is, it's not only irresponsible, it really is threatening. It's threatening to individuals. It's threatening to what they know, which means it's threatening their livelihood. So we need to make sure that we take the responsibility of being a producer of information as a we take the moral high ground, that we look at that as being sacred, and we keep it sacred. That means that it stays pure. The information stays pure. We don't make the information dirty, right? We don't falsify the information. Not if we're producers, we can't. Because I'm a consumer, and I won't be able to consume information the way that I'm supposed to if you're producing bad information. So we have a moral responsibility to produce information that is true. All right? So, when we take a look at American history, how do we know what really happened? And so this is getting me then to this idea of, what did Todorov do in his book in order to make sure that he had accurate information, so that he wasn't just making us look better, but he also wasn't making us look bad? That wasn't the author's intention. The author's intention, as it should be, was to produce truthful information, because the author has a moral obligation to produce truthful information. So, how did this author do that? And so that's what I'm saying. In order for us to be able to write a substantial book on history, what we have to do is we have to do a lot of research. And that's what that author did. And so that author went back to original documents, original letters, right? That author went back to politics and policy of the time. So that author, in order to be able to get an accurate representation of Christopher Columbus as an explorer, this author had to go back to and find all of the real material related to Christopher Columbus's voyage, right? And then that author also had to weigh that material as being truthful or not truthful. So One of the things that we know about Christopher Columbus's voyage is that the Queen of Spain sent him to go find this new world. And the idea was that Columbus was going to bring back the riches of this new world. Okay, so I have there, was Christopher Columbus a villain, an explorer, a conquistador, a missionary? And actually, Christopher Columbus was probably, in some ways, all of those things, right? Although I would have to say, probably not so much a villain, but there are people who are criticizing Christopher Columbus, and there are people who are criticizing our historical figures. So, why would they do that if what I'm saying is, based on this book, Christopher Columbus really was clearly not a villain? He clearly was not a villain. So, how did he get a reputation of possibly, let's like a lot of these first historical figures, we see people who are tearing down statues of historical figures. Why might people do that? Looking back on history, why would people do that to Christopher Columbus? Well, let's take a look at one of those words that I have there. All right. Conquistador. What does that mean? That's a Spanish word for conqueror. He was a conqueror, right? He did conquer the new land. But calling him a villain because he conquered the new land would be like I knew his heart, right? Like I knew whether or not inside Christopher Columbus's heart he was a good man or he was a bad man. And of course, I can't know what's in anybody's heart. So I cannot say that Christopher Columbus was a villain at all because I can't know what is in his heart. I can know what he did, and I can describe his behaviors, right? That's what a scientist does. A scientist describes behaviors. That's what a news person should do as well, describe the news without giving their opinion about it. And then you can decide. But deciding that Christopher Columbus was a villain is probably not based on knowledge, right? It's probably based on your own feelings about what you've read, but it's likely not based on knowledge. Because if I read somebody who did look at the history and did do a thorough examination, you could see that this took years to write this book because it took so much research for this person to do, to actually get a hold of the writings of Christopher Columbus, letters of Christopher Columbus, and other people during that time, and then read all of them and decide, weigh out what is truthful and what isn't truthful. So let's take a look at part of that. What we know is that the Queen of Spain wanted to get her hands on the riches of a new world. Now imagine this. Imagine that you have got a land of opportunity. The United States wasn't just a land of opportunity because people came here to make a new way of life. The United States was the land of opportunity because it had so many resources. It had mountains filled with gold and silver and granite and marble, and we had rich rivers and fields where we can plant wonderful crops and grow wonderful food. So we had resources of water, we had resources for food, and we had resources for wealth. That created wealth, right? And we had animals here that they could hunt and then bring back beautiful furs. So for a brand new land, we had wonderful resources. And it would be a lie to say that people didn't want those resources. It would be a lie to say that we were in this beautiful land of opportunity, but it's okay, we don't need your gold, right? It's okay, we don't need your furs or your animals. That would be a lie. And there's no reason to tell that lie, right? We want those things. We wanted those things in Christopher Columbus's day. We want those things today. We want good, clean water today. We would like the riches of gold today. We would like to own land that gives us wealth, a base of wealth today, right? So these are all things that we all along our human existence have always desired. There's nothing wrong with the Queen of Spain wanting those things. There's nothing wrong with Christopher Columbus wanting those things. There's nothing wrong with you wanting those things, right? There's only something wrong when we begin to lie and produce bad work, right? And then end up consuming bad information or bad food or dirty water or all of those kinds of things. That's when things become bad, right? Is what we do with that desire, what we do when we want gold. What do we do? Wanting gold, that's not bad. We all do, and we can't lie about it, right? What do we do when we want gold? We all want clean water. There's nothing wrong with wanting clean water, right? It's what do we do when people want clean water? Do we contaminate those waters with trains that are derailing? Is that what we do? And then bring our bottled water over there with our name on it? Is that what we do? Because that's what do we do with that desire? That's what makes somebody a villain or an explorer. All right? Now, what I want to tell you is, what did Christopher Columbus want? That is so interesting. So we know that the Queen of Spain sent Christopher Columbus out to this new world in order to get the riches of this land. Okay? There's some other things about that journey that I'm not exactly thinking of. So there's a little bit more to that journey as well. He went south into Central America, right? And settled Mexico is what Columbus did. And so, and in fact, he basically captured and subdued the Indians there, which at the time were Aztecs. So I went and started doing some research on this, and I found out a whole lot of very interesting information about Christopher Columbus, the Aztecs, and the Indians that were there. Okay, so these would be Mexican Indians like American Indians that were there. So what I found out was this. What the book said was that Christopher Columbus was not interested in riches. What Christopher Columbus was interested in was making Christians out of the indigenous population, out of the natives, the people who were native to that area. Natives are people who live there, right? There's nothing wrong with the name native. They are the people who originated there. They lived there. So looking at the writings from Christopher Columbus, his heart's desire was to turn the Indians, Aztecs, into Christians. Now the question became, why was that so easy for Columbus to do? Columbus didn't have difficulty doing it. Why was it so easy for Christopher Columbus to do? Now, what we're getting at, and this is what you want to think about, what would you do if you discovered a new world? This is what you want to think about. What would you do if you discovered a new world? Because historically, what people have done is, historically, they came in and took what they wanted. They took the resources that they wanted. They pillaged the land is what they did for the resources that they wanted. And what did they do to the people? Well, we know what they did to the American Indians. They did the same thing to the Aztecs. What they did was they conquered them. They conquered them. They were conquistadors. So they conquered them. But they weren't villains. So how does this work? Who would you be if you conquered a new world? Who would you be? Well, and how does this happen when they're Christians? So Christopher Columbus's heart's desire was to bring the good news to these natives. That was his desire, was to bring good news to the natives. How is that wrong? In Christopher Columbus's heart, there's nothing wrong with that. What would you do if you discovered a new world? And what if that new world had people on it? Would you want to tell them about their God, about your God? Would you want to tell them about your God? I don't know. What would you want to tell them about? Christopher Columbus wanted to tell them about his God. Now, what was his thinking about the people? What was his thinking about the people? Well, his thinking about the people was that they were savages. That's how he thought about the people, that they were savages, right? The Aztecs actually had a ceremony of sacrificing people to the gods. So, of course, if we came to a new world and told them, you cannot kill people to sacrifice to a god, if we came there, we would probably be doing them a favor, it would look like, wouldn't it? It would look like we were doing something good for those people. Here's what I learned about why the Aztecs sacrificed people to their gods. They did that because they believed if they stopped, that the sun would burn out. So, this is a belief that comes from the earliest of times. The earliest of human beings had this belief in a sun god, right? They believed in a sun god, and what they had to do for that sun god is they had to throw people into the fire and feed the sun god to keep the sun burning. If they didn't do that, the sun would go out and all of civilization would die. That sounds to me like an enormous responsibility. It sounds like an enormous responsibility that in order for me to save all of my people, I needed to sacrifice lives to do that. And their belief is as silly as it sounds maybe to a lot of people. Their belief inside their heart was that if they did not sacrifice people to the sun god, that the sun would burn out and all of earth would be destroyed. Guess what I better do? I better sacrifice people. And by the way, the people who were most often sacrificed were not women and children. They were men. Why? Why? Because it was a tribute to their gods, to their sun god specifically. They had more than one god, but to their sun god specifically. It was a tribute. So a man showed courage if he threw himself into the fire, because what did he do? He saved the entire population. He saved the entire planet. What is so interesting in all of the layers that we learn about is that what did the Christian God Jesus do? What did he do? He died once for all of mankind. Part of his purpose was to dispel the myth that you had to die over and over and over again for the gods. And if you came from a new world, if you came from this other world to this new world and you saw them sacrificing human beings, would you not think that they were barbarians? Would you not think that you had good news to bring them, that they didn't have to do that anymore? And would you not apply your laws to them so that they stopped sacrificing people to gods? And show them that even though they stopped, the sun didn't burn out. Wouldn't you do that? Wouldn't you go to that new world and force those people to hear what you had to say? Wouldn't you go to that new world and do them a favor and stop their practice that they have been doing since the beginning of time? And that's the truth, because these people came from the Middle East. They were nomads and they traveled all the way down from 1500 BC. How about that for history? These people, the Indians, Mexican Indians, they were called Mexica. Was that the Aztecs? No, those were the Aztecs. They had another name for the Indians. It began with the T, and it was a long name, and I didn't know how to pronounce it, but I'll get back to you on that. So those were the original natives. The Aztecs, who were called Mexicas, they were nomads. It's very clear where they came from. They came from the Middle East since the 1500 BC. They came and they walked all the way down to Mexico, and they followed their God's word all the way into Mexico. Oh my gosh, just like Abraham did. Followed his God into a new land and settled in that land. This finding out and reading this book, which has nothing really to do about God except for Christopher Columbus's belief in God, melds together beautiful Bible history. Why was it so easy for Christopher Columbus to come in and conquer the Aztecs? The book tells us because they had already been conquered. The Aztecs the people that were native, they were not Aztec. They were the Mexican Indians that lived there. The Aztecs came in and conquered them. They began to marry into the nomads. The Aztecs came and married into the Mexican Indian population that had running water, that had bridges, that had sophisticated cities. And they married into the population, just like Abraham did, married into the population, and that's how they became known as the Aztecs. But most of that population, or many of the population, much of that population was part of the native population. When Columbus came in and conquered them, they were like, woo! They were so terrible to us. They treated them terribly, like slaves. So the Aztecs that were nomads came in and intermingled with this Mexican Indian society, right? And ended up taking over the natives that were there. When Columbus came in to conquer, they were like, thank goodness you're here. And by the way, Christopher Columbus treated the natives really well, bringing back from Spain goods and trades and knowledge. So who was Christopher Columbus? Christopher Columbus was no villain. Was he a conquistador? He was, but he was a wonderful, complex person. And don't let anybody take away our American history that says anything different than what the truth is about Columbus. Because in all of our sins, our wrongdoings that we might do as explorers, when our heart is in the right place, we have no reason to be ashamed of our behavior. Christopher Columbus's heart was in a wonderful place. He tried to do wonderful things, and therefore we have no reason to be ashamed of Christopher Columbus. And this came from an unbelievable researcher, from an unbelievable producer of historical information. This writer is famous and known for what he produces. And what did he tell me? He told me Christopher Columbus, as should be, was so amazing. He wasn't normal. He was abnormal. Go look at my 2-minute short on what normal is. He was so not normal. And he was so not normal in an amazingly wonderful way. We're going to be learning more about Christopher Columbus. But that's it for today. So join me tomorrow. I will be back here from 8 to 9:30 for our Bookless classroom, where we continue talking about what would you do if you discovered a new world. That's it for this. Okay, let me see where I am on the streaming.